A good Chinese wonton noodle soup with char siu pork is one of my favourite lunchtime options. I haven't been going into the city as much recently, so I looked around and found two recipes, one for the char siu pork and one for a wonton soup, that I combined with noodles to come up with my own version. You start with a pork scotch roast, and I like to trim off most of the fat. Some of them are quite lean and you don't have to do too much of this, but I like to take off any of the major fat, stuff that isn't going to render down during the cooking process. Keep cleaning up the piece of meat until you've removed most of the heavy fat and silver skin that's easily removable, and once you've got it as cleaned up as you can, cut it into the 4 even strips, which gives you access to cut off more of the fat as well. This piece had a particularly thick vein of fat running through it, so I just tried to thin that out as much as I could. You can leave more fat or less fat on depending on how you like it, but it was easy to get at, so I figured I'd just remove whatever I could. Once all the meat has been cleaned up and cut into strips, get a large bowl into which you're going to mix all the ingredients for the sauce, which is Chinese 5-spice powder, garlic salt, soy sauce, Chinese cooking wine, oyster sauce, hoisin sauce, brown sugar, red wine, and red fermented bean curd, which I didn't have, so I added a few drops of red food coloring, which is completely unnecessary and doesn't do anything for the flavor, but it just looks cool. Cover the meat in the sauce and set it aside to marinate. Soak the dry spices in some boiling water and set aside while you prepare your onions, garlic, and shallots. I believe shallots are called scallions elsewhere. I don't know what they're called, spring onions, shallots, scallions. Long, thin onions. White on one end, green on the rest. Finally dice your 2 red onions, and then when they're diced, place them in a bowl. And dice your next onion. And throw that into the bowl with the rest of the onion. Time to peel the garlic. You need around 18 cloves of garlic. I just did whatever was in the head. Peel all your garlic. I like the method where you cut off the end of the garlic and then squish it with the side of the knife. Grab the little pointy bit and pinch it and bash it into the board, and the piece of garlic just sort of falls out while you're left holding the tail end of the garlic, I guess, the skin. And it all comes off in one piece. It's pretty clean. Now that all the garlic's peeled, time to finely chop it. You want small little pieces of garlic, and if you put it through a mincer, it's not going to do that. It's just going to crush the garlic into a sort of goopy mess, where here you want each little piece to be fried in with the onion and the other aromatics. Something that I learned from the video that this recipe came from is that the sticky stuff in garlic when you chop it up is called mercaptan, and you want to remove that by rinsing it under a tap. If you don't, it can give a bitter flavour to the garlic when you're frying it. So rinse it in a sieve and just try to rinse off all the garlic until it's no longer sticky. Then transfer it into some paper towels and dry it off. I think that's shown later, but also chop your scallions, get rid of the water out of the spices that have been soaking, and dry your garlic off. I used the white part and the firmer green part of these shallots or scallions and kept the sort of looser green parts to chop finely and add to the filling, as well as use for a garnish on the soup. The last step is to thinly slice a big chunk of ginger. Now that all the ingredients have been prepared, time to start frying. Put your oil into the wok, add your diced red onion, and mix that through. Add the rest of the ingredients and keep moving everything around to make sure that nothing burns. You're trying to get a golden brown sort of color on the onion and the garlic. I had an electric wok here that I know gets very hot, and I was probably a little overcautious with the heat that I put it on. I should have actually turned it up a bit higher to get everything frying a bit quicker. If I had the temperature of the wok a little bit higher, it would have fried the onion and the garlic more than caramelizing it, which is what I got, but it still tasted good in the wonton filling. And as soon as the color starts to change, you want to turn the heat off and then pick out all of the spices, the shallots, the ginger, everything except for the onion and the garlic. You don't really use the shallots and the ginger and the spices anymore. They've imparted their flavor into the oil, and that was the goal. What this step is creating the aromatic oil which you use in the soup later on, and also the onion and the garlic form one of the ingredients that go into the actual wonton filling. Strain the oil from the onion and garlic and set aside the onion and garlic for the wonton filling, and keep the oil for when you want to add that to the soup later on. This is a slightly modified version of the wonton filling recipe in that we're only using chicken mince here for the protein instead of a mixture of shrimp and chicken. To the chicken you add soy sauce, fish sauce, oyster sauce, and Chinese cooking wine. Then with a spoon mix the sauces through the chicken mince and keep mixing the chicken mince until it starts to get sticky and form a kind of paste. Once it's reached that level, take the fried onion and garlic, put that in, mix it through until it's all well combined. I forgot to record and show a section here which was chopping up the top of the shallots or scallions, the green section, and mixing that through the filling. And I just set aside the filling to rest while I get the Char Siu pork ready. I cooked the pork on my Kamado Joe smoker and put a litre of water underneath to keep the pork moist during smoking process, or the cooking process. I didn't actually use any smoking wood, I just cooked it with the charcoal in the barbecue. Sometimes I put a chunk of cherry wood in there, but to be honest I forgot this time. Lay out the meat with as much space between the pieces as you can get. They will shrink a little bit during the cooking process. Then cook the meat at around 215 degrees Celsius, that is. Every 15 minutes or so you want to come back, baste the meat with the remaining marinade, flip it over, baste the other side, and then cook it for another 15 minutes. Then it's time to go in and start preparing the wontons. This job goes quicker with 2 people. Take a wonton wrapper, place a small spoonful of the filling into the center, and then squeeze the edges together to seal it up. These wonton wrappers do have a lot of corn flour on the outside of them to stop them sticking together, so we just have a little bowl of water there which we dip our finger into and then wipe it along 2 of the edges just to help the edges stick together when you squeeze the wontons together. This made double the number of wontons that we would eat in a single meal, so we froze the rest, and next time we want to eat this meal we just cook the char siu pork, and you can just take the wontons out of the freezer and put them into the soup. Continue basting the pork with the remaining marinade and flipping and doing the other side every 15 minutes. And when you've used up most of the marinade, or it starts to run low, add some honey to the bowl and continue basting it with honey to get that sweet, sticky outside to the pork. During the last half hour of the cook, you want to bump the temperature up to around 250 degrees to really sort of caramelize the outside. It was at about this point where if I'd been on top of things I would have added more water to the tray underneath. I didn't actually end up getting to film the very last part where I took the pork off the barbecue because I was in a flap about the fact that I came out and saw a lot of unexpected smoke billowing out of the barbecue. All the drippings had burnt on the bottom under the water tray and had started spewing out smoke. Thankfully it didn't affect the flavour of the meat. To the boiling chicken stock broth on the stove, add your wontons and bring it all to the boil. While the wontons are cooking, start slicing your char siu pork. Fully expect that a number of hands are going to suddenly appear and pieces of pork are going to disappear as you're slicing. The sweet sticky coating on the outside of the char siu pork works so well with all the spices and flavours in the marinade. It's delicious on its own, but it works really nicely in the wonton noodle soup. When the broth has come to the boil and the wontons float to the top up the pot with some cold water and then allow the wontons to come to the boil again. While that's cooking, your Chinese egg noodles are boiling according to the directions on the packet, ready for the soup. Back to cutting up that last piece of pork, and again you can see lots of hands coming in and lots of pork disappearing. Time to start putting it all together. Put the noodles into the bowls, then spoon in some of the broth, the wontons, baby bok choy, and finish with some of the slices of the char siu pork and some sliced scallions or shallot greens. Oh, and spoon over some of the fragrant oil from the earlier step. If you enjoyed this video, please check out the original char siu pork recipe by Daddy Lau and Souped Up Recipes Chicken Wonton Soup. I couldn't have made this video without their two videos and recipes, so please check them out. I'll make sure that the links are in the description below.